Record to the cloud. Welcome, everyone, to the Gateway API meeting for the 1st of July, 2025. Before we get started, I will remind everyone that this is an official CNCF meeting and therefore is subject to the CNCF Code of Conduct, which pretty much boils down to be nice to everybody, please. In fact, you should continue to be nice to people when you are no longer in meetings subject to the CNCF Code of Conduct. It generally works better. There is an agenda that is open. I'm going to repost that because I don't remember if Zoom chat will let everybody scroll back to get the original link. We would appreciate it if you put your name in the document as an attendee. I am going to do that now since I cleverly failed to do that for myself earlier. And we have an agenda that we can go ahead and begin with. Rob, you have the first item, talking about our shiny new mesh lead who is not on this call today. What?
Oh man, what a disappointment.
Dude.
Yeah, no, exciting times. We have formally recognized Lior as another mesh lead, not replacing anyone, nothing like that, just adding one more. Lior's been doing some awesome work to drive mesh forward along with our existing mesh leads. So yeah, exciting bit of update.
Congrats, Lior.
Lior in particular, Lior in particular has done a lot of annoying, painful, and excellent work on mesh conformance, which we really appreciate. It didn't get done for a long time because nobody wanted to embrace the annoyance and painfulness of it. So yeah, thanks, Lior.
Yeah, but thank you for all that hard work,
Lior. Of course, he's never going to watch this recording, so all that's for naught. But who knows?
He might.
Wait, here he is. Here he is. We spoke of him enough times to summon him. Lior, congratulations on being a new mesh lead.
He's like,
Lior.
Thank you, thank you.
Yeah, we were just talking about how wonderful your mesh conformance work was and how you were never going to hear the recording, so it wasn't going to matter. But yeah, congratulations.
Thank you for your work.
Thank you.
All right. On that note, Rob or Shane, who wants to walk us through some 1.4 updates?
I don't care. Shane, do you want to go first? I threw a few things that felt related to 1.4 in the agenda, but Shane, you're the release manager, so you can...
Yeah, go ahead, because I actually asked Flynn to run this because I'm in the middle of I'm not at my desk, so go ahead.
All right, cool. All right. Flynn, I don't know if you're sharing your screen or intending to, but I can't...
Let me share. I will share my screen, and I will be somewhat embarrassed that I forgot to do that up to this point, because I like seeing everyone's smiling face so much, more than I like watching documents being shared. But that's a good point. Let's do that. Here we go.
Cool. How exciting. All right, so the first one is just Shane's discussion, which reminds everyone of the timelines that we are at. And today we are at the extended but still very real timeline of July 1st, which means Happy Canada Day, everyone. Congrats. But beyond that, we have a deadline to get API details in. I think we have every PR open that we need for experimental gaps.
That's not quite true.
Other than, yes, yours, Flynn, I think, unless I'm missing others.
I think mine is the only one that's not in yet.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
Mine
and I know you have one, you are an overachiever by having one already in, and you have signed up for 2 in this cycle, and 2
I'm not sure
completely non-controversial ones.
I think that masochist might be a better word than overachiever, personally. But
there's also the Damon Gap, however you spell it.
The Dumont Gap as well.
Yeah.
Yes. That's on the list.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, we will talk about that.
What's Dumont in English?
If you don't recognize the reference, you're just going to have to go and search the web until you find it.
Okay. Side note, I read it as a dumb not, like we're not dumb.
No. Although,
so
I mean,
are we expecting this last gap to be added today, or are we expecting it'll drop from scope? Or
so we are. Go ahead.
It's basically as I think Nick was trying to standardize XDauth in Gateway API, we realized that there was no standard, well-defined place for what XDauth, as implemented by a few implementations, it actually is.
Actually is.
Oh,
you know,
okay.
so
Okay.
that
Minor detail.
is, an important detail, and feels like a prerequisite for one of the gaps that is already in scope. Whether or not it belongs in Gateway API versus some other place, we should discuss shortly, but I do think it makes sense.
And on that note,
Yeah, I should have.
I might have. I think Lear is correct. I might have been asking about a different, so like external gateway one.
so
yeah, that's
off-cluster gateways is the one that is currently missing a PR to add its API. That PR will be opened later today.
Okay. Okay. Cool.
Yeah. So it will make the deadline, although it did not make this meeting.
Squeaking in.
Yeah. And, like I said, I'm sure it'll be completely non-controversial anyway.
how I completely. We can just approve it immediately whenever you open
Yeah.
API.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm curious about this. I'm curious about the strategy. It feels like people must leave in controversial comments even though they didn't have.
Wait, on which one?
No, I'm saying Flynn keeps saying it's not going to be controversial.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
I'm curious about his strategy because it feels like people right now must leave in controversial comments even though if they didn't have one.
Yeah, it's just, I keep writing these non-controversial things and then people keep coming up with inflammatory things to say about it, even though they completely agree. I don't know what it is. I guess it's just my writing style. Also, I have a lovely bridge to sell you. And yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, yeah, let's run into this one real quick. I wanted to highlight the PRs for experimental gaps that are open. And this is one that happened to be on the top of the list as I was looking at things last night. These are no particular order other than just, pulled from GitHub UI. I left some comments yesterday on it with my own bits of feedback. But this is a big one. This is primarily focused on Mesh on East-West. So if you're involved or have an opinion on Mesh, I would strongly recommend taking a look. It looks like Flynn's already on there as an auto reviewer, but probably should add a few other folks.
And I confess I have not read this one yet because I've been worrying about writing things, but Lior, I will read this one and comment.
Cool. Yeah, I think that's all for this one.
I'm also finally getting some bandwidth free over the next 2 weeks to get caught up on reading through this stuff.
This is mine. This is the one we were talking about earlier that after John's entirely deserved gentle mockery of the fact that there was no official spec for the protocol that XDauth uses, I went ahead and got the draft off of my laptop into a place where people could look at it. This is a horrible abuse of the GEP machinery. This particular document has absolutely no, right might be a strong word, but this should 100% not be a Gateway API GEP. I am abusing the GEP machinery to make it readable and have a place that people can comment on it that happens to support mermaid diagrams, which I wanted to use. One of the fun things is that we're going to have to figure out where the right place for this is. Harvey has suggested it could go in the XDS repository, even though it's not actually XDS. Harvey, go ahead. You may as well speak for yourself.
Yeah. So I also struggle with this, but basically we need to move XDauth-Z to be a proxy neutral and I think platform neutral place. So ideally, it's not living in the Envoy repo. It's not living in a Kubernetes sort of related repo because XDauth-Z is used more widely than just Kubernetes. It's in fact become sort of a kind of de facto standard for proxy-based external auth. So, one option we have of such a place is the CNCF XDS repo, which is currently very heavily underutilized. Now, what speaks in favor of that is when, so it's kind of a moot point for the HTTP-based auth, but for the gRPC-based auth, that thing uses Protos, right? And they're all in the Envoy XDS namespace, for better or for worse, and uses base types, which are shared with XDS. Now, you might say, well, in a perfect world, the North Star would be we would rewrite XDC Protos and we would make them all fully neutral and use some term like Dumont or whatever. I think that's picking a battle we don't want to fight. Like, it's breaking compatibility just to get proxy neutrality seems a bad move. And I think we should just, at least at this point, until there's a desire for something else, just roll with XAuthC as it exists today and has been implemented in various places, and just try bring some same standardization there and reference. And if in a separate effort, once we have this like neutral home for XAuthC and XProc as well, by the way, like people do want a place to park XProc. We should then think about what further standardization, evolution, and things that we might want to do. The way I actually view this, I don't know if anyone's familiar with the ICAP protocol, but ICAP was an HTTP standard, mostly based around HTTP1 for IETF. It actually looks a bit like what Dumont does, and it's designed to be a bit more general, like XProc. But what we're doing really here is defining ICAP v2 or ICAP 25 or whatever you want to call it, right? ICAP for today, based on how data plane proxies, which are dealing with HTTP, need to be able to funnel HTTP sort of to services and have it provide authorization decisions or mutations or whatever, or observability, this kind of thing. Like, how do you do service chaining with HTTP? Essentially, is what's going on here. So, I would be happy to also just approach CNCF and say, could we create a repo which is, CNCF service chaining or whatever you want to call it. Like, I know service chaining is a kind of a loaded term, but something like that.
Harvey, is this the ICAP you're talking about?
That's what I'm talking about. Give it a read. It'll feel pretty familiar to you.
Oh my God, 2003.
I mean, yeah. It's kind of like the .com era version of what we're discussing, and it's all it's before pre-HTTP2 and streaming, right? By streaming and all this kind of stuff. So it reflects a different worldview than the one that exists now. But I think it's it's worth thinking about. Like, would we want to eventually do this? I don't think we should couple any of these efforts. Like, IETF standards are very heavyweight. I think just getting it to the level of GAP agreements is pretty good win. So if you want me to take an AI, and I can work with you on Slack, Flynn, to do that, is just to try and approach some of the folks to resolve this, and we can try figure this out from that next meeting.
Yeah, I think that would be a good thing to do.
I'm interested in hearing other perspectives too.
I think I'm going to have to stop sharing and then reshare it because my browser is going insane. That's great. Thanks, browser. Really appreciate that. For the record, I would tend to agree with you that going all the way to an RFC, while it would be entertaining, would be an awful lot of work. And I would also tend to agree that that getting everything, that starting with continuing with the Envoy XDS types makes more sense than trying to redo the whole thing wholesale all at once. I did do a certain amount of reading over some of those types and taking a look at the way things fit together. And there are things that I think we would need to refactor before calling it a standard. In particular, like, there are 3 different levels of metadata that show up in some of those that are very Envoy specific, and figuring out how we deal with that so that other implementations don't have to try to emulate Envoy, I think is important.
But Flynn,
but that
is,
might just, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry. I just wanted to say that is actually gets to one of my biggest concerns with Nick's proposal is there are certain things when we think about like authentication, right, which are encoded in, let's say, Envoy attributes or metadata today, which you might reasonably want to say, well, if you're building an authorization service, which is separating authentication and authorization concerns, you would want to consume from the proxy itself, which is doing, let's say, the authentication work. And that's, I feel, unless you start to add some of these things, which you're saying, well, we should pull them out, say to Envoy specific, unless you standardize some of those things, like what is XALT-Z? Is it the thing which we call out to, which does all your authentication and all your authorization? And then, like, how do I interact with front-end MTLS identity in that case, for example? Somehow that needs to be made as an attribute or in the metadata, right?
Sorry, let me phrase that differently. What I'm talking about there is specifically the dynamic metadata fields, which show up at a few different levels, right? Metadata in the broad sense, like TLS information. Yeah, we have to, that's important. We should deal with that. But also that's not something that's particularly tied to Envoy, right? That's something that any gateway would be reasonably expected to have access to.
Correct. But some of the Envoy filters work, like the job filter, do populate dynamic metadata. So we should just make sure that we're not like or figure out an alternative mechanism which is proxy neutral for conveying things like JOT claims.
And again, to be clear, I think that starting by moving it someplace out of Envoy and keeping all the typing the same is absolutely a great first step.
Yeah.
And so.
I hear you. I'm like, we don't want like gratuitous Envoyisms to creep in, but to the extent that they are useful to the task of Alt-Z, then we should take them seriously or find an alternative.
All right. Let's skip default gateways while I'm typing and come back to it after talking about supported features. Anybody?
I can.
Sorry, supported features was who is that? Was that Lior? No.
Lior has been leading it. So yeah, Lior, you're probably best to talk about it. But I know Becca has been doing a lot of the work recently.
Yep. What, just like updates or something?
Yeah, I'm just basically.
So sorry about the noise from the coffee house. It's so basically support features, we're good to, like, things are going on. I think at this point Becca's already put the placeholders for implementing things that's only for mesh. I'm not sure, Flynn, if you were in the last meeting, but we basically said that I brought up the mesh case, like not having a mesh resource, and we're just gonna allow mesh to report without inferring supported features from gateway class until we sort it out. We're gonna introduce, there is already APR open to introduce enums to basically say in the report whether this report has been inferred or it's undefined, and the ultimate goal is to actually block the report function from actually report if it's not inferred for gateway implementations. And things are on track. We need to also open the update the GEP with the relevant details and how we handle mesh and all that, and basically move the GEP to just standard. So I think things are on track there.
Cool.
That's awesome. Yeah, and this specific update is just one more incremental update, and for anyone who hasn't been following along closely, this means if you're running conformance tests starting in the next release, you'll be wanting to populate supported features on a gateway class instead of submitting them via flag. That's the main takeaway for someone outside. I think. I'm not sure how XDoth got indented weird, but
it was right justified. I don't know how that happened either.
That's fun. Oh, okay. Yeah, Cool. Who knew? All right.
Yeah.
Nick isn't here to talk for himself. I think we've already roughly covered this one, so I don't know if there's any more to say on it other than this is a big area. Nick's going to be, oh, I should say, Nick is going to be out starting tomorrow, I think.
I think he said tomorrow.
Yeah.
Well,
and
that might mean today, because
you're right, exactly. It was his tomorrow when I talked to him yesterday. So
yeah.
Whatever that means. But frankly, it means that he's not going to have a lot more time for this gap. He did agree to give me right access to this. I think it's pretty close, but I will try and help keep it alive while he's out on vacation.
Cool.
And then TLS route. This is just an update from Rusty, which we've talked about before, but this is basically host name should be required. I think we can get away with. So I think there's broad agreement that host name should be required. If not, we can talk about that here. But the other big open item here is how we do the transition, because it's a breaking change to take something that wasn't required and make it required. I think we can do this while we keep V1 Alpha 2 alive, and we'll have to have V1 Alpha 3, but I think we'll be able to release one version of the API that includes both. It's going to be messy. I can't completely guarantee that, but I still strongly believe in the guideline of, for experimental channel, conversion webhooks are not worth the effort. So if we can't get this to work without a conversion webhook, we won't get it to work, and it'll just be a disruptive change. But I think we can get it to work. But just heads up that I continue to be of the opinion that conversion webhooks are awful and should be avoided for at least alpha APIs.
I would tend to agree that experimental channel should include disruptive changes every so often, because I think that the worst problem is people believing that the experimental channel is stable.
Yep. Agreed. Cool. And then last one is client cert verification. Thanks to Katarzyna for reminding me about this. I don't know. I don't know if Arco's on the call, but if not, Katarzyna, do you have any context on this one?
Yeah, I think unfortunately Arco is not here. So this gap, we discussed this during the KubeCon, that we want to move the configuration for client-server validation up to the gateway. But Arco still wanted to leave some backup on the listener. And this in this proposal, Arco proposed to move this configuration to the gateway, but still we are lacking some agreement on how we want to do the override on the listener level. It's in draft phase. I'm not I will ask Arco to move this to ready for review so others can see. I can see that John was commenting, and I also was commenting on the similar thing, that in this phase it's actually not fully addressing the coalescing issue. So that's the TLDR, I guess.
Is KL52752 you, Katarzyna?
Yes, exactly. That's me.
Good to know.
Yeah.
Okay, so okay. That looks like it might be fairly far from consensus, but it also looks like it's met the 1 July deadline, and so there are 3 more weeks to bring it to consensus before anything happens. Am I right about that, Shane? If Shane is still here?
I'm here. Yes.
Was that yes that you're here, or yes that I'm right about the dates?
Yes.
Thanks. Appreciate that, Shane. Always helpful.
You're welcome. It's yes.
Yeah,
Okay.
I mean, for this one, it's a little special because it the API is already in place. This is just an update to something that's already an experimental channel. So it's not like we would pull it entirely from scope, but I think it's reasonable to say that we may need to pull these specific changes from scope if they
Oh
can
yeah.
get in soon.
Yeah. We have we are at the half hour, just a heads up though. I think we might be okay. I do kind of want to talk about the backend TLS route additional gap.
Backend TLS
What-
route or
wait.
backend TLS
Sorry,
policy.
backend TLS policy, the gap that
Okay.
Yeah.
John put up.
Let's
Yeah.
let's back up to the
me put
default
it at the
gateways
end
one
of
so
the-
that we don't
yeah.
forget it.
I'll put it at the end after Jonathan and Antoine.
Okay, cool. Default gateways, I think the most currently interesting questions have to do with whether or not we enforce limits on the number of default gateways in a cluster or whatever. I have put a lengthy comment on the PR, so I think we can probably skip that particular one in this meeting unless anybody who's read that comment wants to talk about it. The other
You
question
add
there,
that comment to the meeting notes.
yeah, if I can find it. The other question that seems to be a little bit open has to do with, oh, well, should we arrange things such that you have to do something specific to say that you want a default route, or is it enough to omit the parent refs? I actually had a question there, which was, Rob, you said something interesting in your comments to the tune of, oh, if you have a route with no parent refs, then it is currently defined as internal only. And that is quite far from what I was thinking about a route with no parent refs, because as far as I can tell, there is no way that a route with no parent refs can have any effect on your behavior at all right now.
Yeah. Sorry, I realized my wording there was subpar. What I meant to say is when you have an HTTP route with no parent refs, like it means it's not exposing that traffic anywhere. That's what
Yes.
I meant. So, and I was trying to suggest that this behavior could result in some accidental exposure, likely will, in the sense that you have HTTP route sitting in your cluster. I think it's an edge case, but at least some people are probably creating HTTP routes and intentionally not exposing them by leaving parent refs empty. They're just kind of work in progress. And then along comes a default gateway and gobbles them up. And all of a sudden they're out exposed to the world, right? We've completely shifted the behavior of what it means to have no parent ref, and that seems scary to me.
Lior, were you going to add something there?
Not at this point, but to a different point in the same.
Okay. Yeah, I'm curious what anybody else thinks about that. I tend to be of the impression, like, I don't really recall seeing people do lots of work in progress routing stuff like that in my past. Now, the flip side of that one is that I also confess, until I tried it, I had expected that such a route would not pass validation and would not be allowed to be on the cluster at all. And I am
Yep.
very surprised that validation allows it. So,
No,
anybody-
I went through the same path. Like, I don't think it's common, and I was like,
Yeah.
surely this isn't possible. And if it's a net new behavior, then great, right? Then we
Yeah.
can do whatever we want. But because we've already allowed it, there's probably someone out there using it that this would disrupt. Like we're meaningfully changing a behavior that, for better or worse, we've already allowed. I honestly can't remember why we allowed it.
I'm going to suspect we allowed it because somebody misread the validation rule, candidly.
Do we know if when we had the webhook was it allowed with the webhook, or it just got imported to cell or something?
No, you don't
That's
even need
actually a
something
really
for this.
interesting question.
I think this was an intentional loosening of validation, but I'm gonna need to look through some git blame to remember why it is the way that it is, because
Yeah.
but in either case, it is the way that it is. So we have
Yeah. So I would encourage people to, sorry, I don't want to burn up the entire rest of the time we have for this meeting on this issue. I would encourage people to bring that back to the GEP and comment comment there. I could probably be convinced to have something, like a kind default gateway. I don't like it because I really, really dislike making people include useless boilerplate in their specification. Leora, I don't know if your thumbs down is because you also disapprove of useless boilerplate, or if it's
Support
because
you.
you
I
disagree
support
with
you.
what I'm saying.
I
Okay.
support every single word you said.
Excellent. I appreciate that. Especially because it happens so rarely. But yeah, in all seriousness, I would really like to hear more from other people about this, and also on the multiple default gateways thing. Luella,
have a-
while I'm finding a link to the comment on multiple default gateways thing, there we go.
Yeah,
What
I have a probably simple question that you can educate me. Why don't we put it on a gateway class if it's per gateway class? Probably it has been considered, but I'm not sure why. Why not?
One moment. If somebody else was about to say something, go ahead.
what would you put on a gateway class? Sorry.
The default gateway field on a gateway class that specifies the default gateway.
What does it mean? If you have 5 different gateways associated to a gateway class, and you say this gateway class is the default, which of those 5 gateways do you want?
I'm saying the default gateway field on the gateway class would reference the default gateway.
Basically, what you're saying is gateway class API now has a new default gateway ref, basically, and any gateway class can define one.
Yeah, and this is configurable. So assuming you want to do something else.
It's hard for me to see why that gains you anything over putting the default in the gateway, because the gateway is the thing you want to configure as the default.
Because if you want to do it one-to-one per gateway class, I know you're going to go into the multiple comment.
I think I put the comment that I've referenced here in the doc, I think is one that I wrote too early before this meeting for people to be able to read it. And I would encourage reading it before we dive into this particular discussion. The short version there is that I started from the perspective that we would want exactly one default gateway in the cluster, and then very, very reluctantly realized that that was not going to work for both implementation and operational reasons. I did not like that conclusion, just for the record, but
Okay.
I am 100% convinced of it at this point. And there's stuff in the doc about it, and there's also stuff in a comment that amplifies it and perhaps would need to come into the doc.
I know every now and then I disagree with you, but this time
Shocking.
I fully agree with you. but
yeah,
no,
it's
plus one.
One of the really, really fascinating things about writing this API def was writing it and then looking at Nick's comments right afterwards and having Nick say things like, yeah, I think this is about right. And I'm looking at it going, wait, is this really Nick? Did somebody hack Nick's account? What's up with this? Mike, did you have... actually, I'm sorry. Murray, was there more that you wanted to add?
Sorry.
Well, yeah, I'm still I'm gonna read the comment because I'm still not read it yet, but I'm just still confused about the value of multiple gateways plus, gateway class picture, placing the whole picture, especially because, not how would it interoperate between different implementations. But I'm gonna read this and ask any questions if I have.
Mike, thank you, Leor.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify that I think I remember this being one of the intended use cases, but something like shipping an HTTP route in an implementation of something similar to the pattern that had been used with Ingress before,
Right.
so that we have no reference whatsoever to anything in the cluster on the HTTP route. That's an intended use case of this still, right?
That is an intended use case.
Okay.
I should
I just kind of
probably
wanted to like get
I
that in
should
my
probably
head before
explicitly
thinking
write
about
that.
the like what might happen with multiple gateways and how default would be handled. Because I feel like it's a constraint that like closes the design space for how we could solve that.
Yeah.
To me, it feels like this one is, primarily about trying to ease the friction of an application owner wanting to create a route and not wanting to think about what gateways do or do not exist in their cluster. I just want a route, and this should expose it to the world. Right?
Yeah.
And so given that, I think that to me, it doesn't really matter if you have one or two gateways. As long as they are applied by default, the mission has been accomplished, right?
Yep. Yeah, agreed. And as I was thinking about operational stuff, it turned out there were reasons why I think we need to support more than one, which made me sad, but okay. All right. 18 minutes left. So we already mentioned that I was going to file a PR for the off-cluster gateway API. Jonathan and Antoine from Gravite, I don't know how to pronounce that. Kafka route.
Yeah, Gravity.
Gravity. Okay.
Hey, I'm Jonathan. So nice to meet you all. It's our first time participating in one of these meetings.
Welcome.
We work for a company, Antoine and I, called Gravity, where we're an API management vendor. So maybe I can just give you 2 minutes of context about this. So basically, we as a company have been working on extending our API gateway to support the Kafka protocol natively, which it does now. And in parallel, we've also started implementing the gateway API. So we've got sort of partial conformance at this point, and soon I think we'll be pretty solid on the gateway and HTTP route. And because we do both these things, we're kind of had this idea of combining both and saying, why not extend the gateway API to support Kafka natively? So over the last few weeks and months, basically, I've just been testing the idea a little bit and sort of, wrote this article. And I went to KubeCon in London, and then I went to Kafka Summit, Current, which is the Kafka conference in London a couple months ago. And basically, so I did a talk at Current where I presented the idea and sort of I asked people to raise their hands, like, who knows about the Kubernetes Gateway API in this room? And I was expecting like 3 or 4 people. It was a Kafka event, right? But basically everyone in the room raised their hands, like tons of people had come basically to see this. And so generated a lot of interesting discussion. And after the event, I had Trimzy maintainers who came up to me. I had Confluent operators of Kafka that came up. There was a guy from OpenAI as well. So lots of people basically found the idea quite compelling. I think essentially lots of companies are trying to basically operate Kafka in multi-cloud environments across different platforms. And the challenge of exposing Kafka outside of a cluster or outside of a cloud environment is kind of a tricky thing in and of itself. And then if you add to that the fact that you might want to apply certain types of policies or transformations or security at that layer, I think that's kind of why overall it seemed to sort of resonate. So I think a lot of people are basically trying to solve this problem themselves in different configurations, and it's not a lot of fun. So we've basically done an experimental Kafka route object already. I can maybe put the link in the notes as well, which basically
that would be nice.
Yeah, I'll put that in there right now actually. And obviously the requirement is that the technology under the hood can actually interpret the Kafka protocol natively, and so act as a Kafka broker itself. It kind of the gateway looks like a Kafka broker to the outside world, and then it's able to proxy brokers and do all kinds of mapping with the discovery protocols and all that sort of stuff that it might need to handle. So yeah, I thought basically because we've got a bit of interest around this, both on sort of vendor side and end users, I thought it was kind of interesting to just come to this meeting and chat about it a little bit. with no real strong intention other than basically just letting you guys know that there's something we're exploring and talking about, and I thought it'd be interesting to get your thoughts on it, basically. So that's the TLDR for me, really.
It's definitely interesting. And Mike's initial reaction that he put into the doc there, I think is possibly one of the most interesting things about it. Rob, you had your hand raised?
Yeah, no, I mean, +1. This is awesome. Thank you for presenting this. Sorry we missed you, or I missed you at least at KubeCon London.
I missed
if
him
you,
too. Sorry about that.
Yeah, if you happen to be at another KubeCon, ping me. It would be great to catch up.
Sure.
With that
Likewise.
said, this is awesome to see, because this is exactly the kind of thing we wanted to enable with the modular layered nature of Gateway API, right? The idea that you can bring your own route. That this is awesome. With that said, I tend to agree with Mike's initial reaction here of, if instead of this being a Kubernetes thing, if it was a Kafka branded thing, that would be a really neat path forward. I don't know what, I don't know what the right path is here either. This is new to all of us, I guess. But if there's interest in Kafka community, maybe that's a place where, instead of needing to go through like Kubernetes API review, maybe it's more useful to go through Kafka API review. I don't know, right?
Well, maybe the simplest way to put it is that seems like an interesting path to explore, if nothing else.
Yeah.
It's definitely the community is there, and so those are the people who are going to care the most, I guess.
Yeah, it's if you write a GEP for it and try to get it through Gateway API, for example, then you need to jump through a bunch of hoops, like having multiple different implementations and going through the whole GEP process and all of this stuff. And that may or may not serve you well. I'd like to emphasize the may or may not part of that. It may, right? It may turn out that if you go back to the Kafka community, that you find out that is exactly what people want, in which case, absolutely, we would welcome that. But you may also find that the Kafka community is perfectly happy to just have it be a thing within Kafka that any Kafka implementer can go with, and we would be fine with that as well.
Right. So that means, going the Kafka project route means it would never be part of the Gateway API. And is that the case for the inference extension as well? It's not actually part of this.
If I have anything to say about it. I'm sorry, was that my outside voice?
It is the current state.
It is the current state. Yeah.
Okay.
It's
okay. Interesting.
Yeah.
Sorry, what was I missed the question about.
Is it the case that the inference extension is also not a part of Gateway API? And I believe that the current answer is yes. The Gateway inference extension is not part of Gateway API. It is a thing that uses extension mechanisms that exist within Gateway API. If I'm wrong about that,
it is a subproject unto itself.
Yeah, if I'm wrong about that, I would love to,
No, it's a subproject. I think that, if that's a whole other topic. But yes, I think, it's a very specialized, relatively niche area where Gateway API generally focuses on things that are,
less niche.
And I'm not trying to say inference is niche. It's growing, but it is not, not the same as HTTP route, which generally applies to any form of routing traffic, whereas inference is very focused. And I would say, there's some similarities here between Kafka routing and inference routing, right?
Yeah. Compared to the class of routing HTTP traffic, inference routing is pretty niche, right? Which is not a judgment other than the definition of the word. Shane, you've had your hand up for a little while.
Yeah, I think this is very cool.
Sorry to run you off, Rob. Have a good one. Go ahead, Shane. Sorry.
I think this is very cool. I am impressed. I think the question of could this live in Gateway API is an interesting one. The only precedent of which I know is Stun. we had a brief question for a
Oh,
time
yeah.
whether or not we would do stun, and the implementers at the time basically used UDP route but put their own semantics on top of a UDP route to make a stun route effectively. And that was partially just because at the time it didn't seem like we would accept stun. It wasn't broadly implementable, that sort of thing. One of the things about Kafka route that is interesting is that I don't see that it fits cleanly into the current implementations. So like I can't see any ingress controller, if you want to call it that, or gateway controller, or any mesh. I don't know of anyone that would implement that. Have you thought about that? Like, are there implementations of Gateway API today
Yeah,
that would benefit from a Kafka route?
I can see potentially one potentially being a future implementer, which I suspect Kong might be getting there at some point. I think maybe someone from Kong on the
That's
call.
interesting.
But there are other companies that are more focused on basically the pure event gateway type capability, which don't do HTTP yet, which are unlikely to do it, but they could also be implementers, but they wouldn't have the HTTP part. So yeah, I think the vendor implementation at this point is still going to be fairly limited, which I realize is one of the reasons why this is not likely to be a mainstream thing like in the immediate future. So yeah, have thought about it. It's not massive, but I mean, I've been working the API space and the event-driven space for quite a few years now, and there's this sort of long-lasting hope that event-driven systems will become as sort of first class as events at some point in the enterprise. And I think we are getting there more and more, basically more than ever. And so this is kind of hinting at that sort of starting to happen a little bit with all these new event gateway products emerging and these API gateways that are starting to support Kafka as well. So if there's never been as good a time to talk about it, I think. But it doesn't. Yeah, the adoption is fairly slow, I would say.
Yeah, I got you. One of the reasons I asked that is because for anything that goes into Gateway API today, we say that 3 implementations need to be able to report conformance for it. And I feel like that would be a little bit of a struggle with Kafka route specifically. I have another question that's related, and then I'll come back to that. And that is, since this is not CNCF, Kafka is Apache Foundation. Do they have a standards body for like these kinds of APIs? I'm just curious. I don't remember. I haven't worked on Apache stuff since like Mesos days.
I personally don't have the answer to that one.
Okay, I'd be interested to know if they have something that is even remotely parallel to like Kubernetes API or something like that, where they track APIs or generic implementations of any of their things. But coming back to like, if we would ever do it in Gateway API, we would need some conformant implementations. So we might want to consider, if Kafka is too specific, too niche, and will only work for maybe 1 implementation or 2 implementations, is there an underlying route type that can be adapted for you to basically give you much of what is needed to build the Kafka kind of layer on top? Like, are you using TCP route, or are you just straight Kafka route? Like, what's going on under the hood? Because Kafka is like TCP, right? Remind me.
Well, actually, TCP is the transport layer, but if you want to interpret the Kafka protocol itself, it's a whole protocol on top which has specific.
Yeah, it's like JSON or something. It's like some kind of.
No, it's some kind of wire level protocol. I wouldn't go into the details. Maybe Antoine, who's on the call, could, but basically, yeah, it has its own protocol with things like create topic or publish a message or read a message. Those are all parts of the Kafka protocol that you could basically have as a first-class citizen at the gateway API layer if you had this sort of extension. So some of the examples or hypothetical examples of Kafka route, you could have ACLs to say like who is allowed to create a topic, or who is allowed to consume from a topic, or who is allowed to create, do all these kind of operations basically on the Kafka protocol itself. So we can already do it with TCP, and you could, in fact, if you I looked at the Strimzi project and they had some examples of how to use TCP route, I think, to expose Kafka. So you can do it, but you're not seeing the Kafka protocol at a native sort of level.
Yeah, I gotcha. I forgive my question because it comes from a place of being basically completely unfamiliar with Kafka.
No problem.
But the point of the question is less about the specifics, because those don't necessarily matter as much as like, well, one thing that kind of seems to matter then is what is the layer on top that makes it so much better? Like, if you had a TCP route, what would you add into kind of the routing semantics and stuff like that?
So I'm going to jump here. Let me jump in here and point out that we have about 5 minutes left. and we could
Okay, well, maybe it's good
easily-
enough then to, yeah, maybe it's good
Yeah.
enough then to dial back and say, as we explore this further, the next question I would say is what, like, break it down and see, is there something that's a little bit more generic here? Is there something that isn't Kafka specific that would be more universal across different protocols or something like that? I don't know of anything offhand, but that'd be at least something to kind of explore.
Yeah.
Yep.
Mike, did you have anything you wanted to add quickly on this?
Just the blog post does get into some of the like what's the benefit of this with some of the like protocol semantics. So that's definitely worth reading if you're taking a look at this. And then yeah, I don't expect that getting 3 conformant implementations would be a problem because of like how popular Kafka is. I absolutely see that being achievable.
Okay,
I'm
cool.
more
That's
thinking
good
of-
perspective, because that's not perspective that I had.
Okay, so I'm more thinking like further down the road of like, does privileging specific integrations or protocols like this, particularly like protocols that aren't under the CNCF or a like even more like global standards body, is that a precedent that we want to set here? And like if so, like how do we anticipate handling AMQP, Redis, Postgres, like other potential like layers on top of TCP?
Yeah, it's a very interesting question for sure.
Yeah, I think MQTTS was also proposed at some point.
Yeah, and like
There-
all of those are like relatively popular, and I think Stun is actually kind of like the good counterexample of like that's a pretty obscure protocol that was for a specific
Well,
implementation.
It depends on which industry you're working in as to how obscure it is, right?
Right, but it was the
But-
only
Yeah.
example of it was the only example I could think of, except for maybe MQTTS, but I can't find it right now, of
Yeah.
somebody officially kind of asking for something like this, and it didn't really move.
Yeah. Okay. Overall, yeah, that's very interesting. We would love it if you stayed in touch. And now that we've done the moral equivalent of saying, here's your homework, we would still love to stay in touch.
Yeah, yeah. We'll keep you in the loop and see where
Yeah.
it goes.
Yeah, that sounds fascinating.
Okay.
Yeah,
Shane
Mike's
was,
sentiment that he thinks that it really would be implemented fairly widely gives me hope, because I wasn't sure at first, but
I'm
that's
still
just my
not
own.
sure.
Yeah,
I'm
that's
still
just my
not
own
sure,
perspective.
although, yeah, it is definitely interesting, and it is kind of fascinating to think about the whole event thing in general. Mattia, you have, well, okay. Shane,
Yeah,
I don't
just-
think we're going to get to the back-end TLS policy gap. Mattia, what was it that you wanted to add?
Yeah, no, super quick. I just wanted to add a couple of words on the Kong solution that has been mentioned by Jonathan. Kong has implemented an event gateway right now. It's kind of in a very early stage. It's not yet working on Kubernetes, so we couldn't be a real implementer right now, but I think it's a compelling use case and a compelling route, and this could be useful and interesting for the future for sure.
Does
Yeah,
the event gateway only do Kafka, or does it do other event bus things as well?
It's a very hard question to answer for me because I don't really know. Kafka for sure, maybe Rabbit as well. I don't know. I'll figure it out. I'm very disconnected from that team. But yeah,
Gotcha.
I can foresee us implementing the event gateway in Kubernetes as well in the future. So this is definitely a possibility.
Cool. Good to know. All right. Shane has put a link to the new backend TLS policy gap in the document. Given that it is currently 59 minutes past the hour, I don't know that we want to open that particular can of
No, we
worms
can't do
right
it.
now.
The TLDR is if we're going to set a precedent from letting something kind of jump in sideways in a release like this, especially right after we just started doing the whole release management process, I just want to have that documented in a way that people can understand why it got in. That's all. So please go check out that gap if you're interested, and then that's probably more of a conversation for maintainers and stuff ultimately.
Yeah. I would also encourage people to go check out that gap. And I would echo everything Shane just said about things jumping in sideways at the tail end of a release, et cetera, et cetera. That's always an interesting bit of precedent to set, right? All right. We are at the top of the hour. If anybody has anything that they really, really want to get off their chest in the next 30 seconds or so, now is the time. Otherwise, there will be another meeting on July 7th, I believe, at something like 3 p.m. Pacific, 6 p.m. Eastern, the middle of the night if you're in Europe, something like that. I may or may not be there, but I will certainly be back here in 2 weeks for the one on the 15th. And yeah, good to see everybody. Thank you for joining. We'll do it again soon.
Thank you for running it today on short notice, Flynn. Appreciate that.
Not a problem. All right. Have a good one.
Bye, everyone.